It's going from bad to worse for the PM, with a whole string of new polls out today predicting a Tory wipeout.
Yes, Rishi Sunak could become the first Prime Minister in history to lose his seat at an election, with a Savanta poll for The Telegraph finding that the Conservatives could be reduced to just 53 seats.
The same poll points to Labour winning 516. That gives them a majority of 382. Which is obviously huge, double that Tony Blair had in 1997.
Well, let's take a look back at what our politicians got up to on the campaign trail yesterday.
Well, the hard truth is that for millions of people, they're not going to be feeling better off today. Food prices are 25% higher than they were just 2 years ago. And, of course, the average mortgage holder is seeing their mortgage go up by £3,000.
Of course, an independent Scotland, like all countries, would face challenges. Success would not be guaranteed. That would be determined by our own decisions as a country and the choices we make. But when we look at independent European countries similar to Scotland, there are grounds for optimism and hope. Countries like Denmark, Ireland and Sweden are wealthier per head than the United Kingdom.
We have been really clear that we're not raising income tax, national insurance or VAT. All of our plans are fully funded and don't require tax rises over and above what we've already set out. And that is because we're focusing on growing our economy.
If people come here illegally, they shouldn't be able to stay. We need to remove them somewhere else. And if we can get that up and running, then people will stop coming. And multiple other European countries agree with us. That's a choice for people at this election.
If Keir Starmer becomes the Prime Minister, within 6 months, Britain will be at war. I don't mean a proxy war. I don't mean special forces dressed up as Arabs or Russians, Ukrainians. I mean an actual war.
All right, let's get the thoughts of the editor of Spiked, Tom Slater, who's here. Tom, good to see you this morning. We've got to kick off with this Savanta poll in The Telegraph, because when you look at the graphic that they've produced, the entire country is going from pretty much from blue to red.
This is absolutely incredible. I mean, you've already talked about the headline numbers there. 516 seats for Labour, 382 majority. The Tories will be down on 53 seats, put them just 3 seats ahead of the Lib Dems in this particular poll. Interestingly, 0 seats for Reform, which is different to what we've seen in some of the other MRP polls. But at the same time, you can't question the sort of direction of travel. It's worth saying that this is the kind of bigger end of the expectations for Labour at this point.
Yeah.
But in the context of what we were expecting this election to pan out for, we all knew it was going to be a drubbing for the Conservatives, but we're now in a situation where if they're reduced to a rump of just 100 MPs, that would almost be seen as a relatively good outcome. So unless all of these polls are wrong on a scale that we haven't really seen before, and this type of poll, these mega polls, MRP polls, have a relatively good track record of predicting elections in recent years, unless there's been some screw-up on a scale that we haven't seen before, the Tories are heading for a defeat which is pretty much unprecedented in the modern political era. So this is going to be fascinating to watch.
And this poll also suggests that half of the current cabinet, could lose their seat, including Rishi Sunak.
Including Rishi Sunak. That has never happened before. There's been some close shaves over the years, but this will be the first time ever that you've got a sitting Prime Minister losing his seat. Many of the potential successors would be wiped out. Penny Mordaunt, Grant Shapps, even Robert Jenrick. And it would be a really fascinating question as to what the Tory party would look like after all this. There's a lot of discussion about what the future of Toryism is going to be, but it's not even clear if there's going to be any Tories to lead that discussion.
I mean, I know there's a general sort of direction of travel, but even so, it's still a bit of an outlier poll, this, isn't it? I mean, there's an Ipsos poll out today. I mean, they're using the MRP model as well. I mean, they've got Labour on 453, Conservatives on 115. Labour getting a 256-seat majority. I mean, heck, it sounds like the Tories are doing comparatively well in that one, when you look at these figures.
Absolutely, and there was a YouGov one that was published last night which had the Tories on, a more healthy-looking 108. But we've got to remember that the Tories haven't got any less than 160 seats. You've got to go back to before 1906 for that to take place. That's how long a kind of scope you need to put this into context. And this is a party which, let's not forget, was often talked about as the most successful political party in the democratic world over the past 150 years, spent north of 96 of those years actually in power in some form or another. And it's now just being cast aside in the course of one electoral cycle. This is really historic thing that we're living through, if any of this is even relatively accurate.
I mean, there'll be so many Tories, especially those in the cabinet that we just mentioned, who will be despairing at Rishi Sunak's decision to go early on this. Do you think it would have made a difference if he'd have gone in the autumn? At least then people might have felt the pound in their pocket a bit more.
I think maybe, but at the same time, I do wonder if, given everything that we know now, if any of that would have made that much of a difference. It does feel like the decisive thing has been Farage throwing himself into the race. Clearly, if what he has been saying is to be believed, he would have been in a better position, or he would have been actually better prepped to actually get involved in an autumn election than he would the one that was allegedly sprung on him. But I also think it's worth saying that the writing's been on the wall for some time, and I think it was always just going to take a campaign for just how much of a busted flush the Tories are to reveal itself, and that's what we've ended up with in terms of this campaign. Yeah,
but we see we're not getting anything new, are we, in all of this? I mean, there's strategists saying that the Tories should be doing nothing but focusing on Labour. And instead, I mean, today, when we're talking to Michael Gove later on, they're saying, we're going to permanently scrap first-time buyer stamp duty, which is something that's been in place since 2020 anyway. So, I mean, it just seems like a very weak thing to be leading on.
You would think so, and you would think that they would really be kind of throwing everything at trying to win back voters at this point. And that's not really what we've seen. You've seen the continuation of quite a cautious sort of campaign. A policy like this is another example of the Tories basically saying, don't worry, we'll clean up the mess that we've already made for ourselves. Please vote for us. It doesn't really work. I mean, the one very thin upside, you could say, is that all of this crazy polling actually does play into their narrative at this point, which is that there is going to be this Labour supermajority. Do you really want Keir Starmer to have a mandate to completely remake the country in his image? Although I don't think many people are quite clear what that would look like. But that's pretty thin gruel to support yourself on, the fact that your message of recent days, please do not reduce us to an absolute rump, because otherwise Labour will be in power forever. If that's your best card to play, it's a reminder of how terribly this campaign has gone for them.
Can I ask you about these bets about the general election dates? Because we had a police officer, didn't we, in the Prime Minister's close protection team, who has been suspended and arrested over alleged bets about the general election. And then, meanwhile, I've also got the second Conservative candidate who's being looked into by the Gambling Commission for the same thing.
It's incredible. So this is Laura Saunders. She's the party's candidate in Bristol North West, and again, we're seeing another one of these instances of someone in and around the Tory party clearly being privy to the Prime Minister's thinking, or maybe just sense where the wind was blowing, and placing a bet on this to the point where the Gambling Commission is having to get involved. And I think it's been incredible, this campaign, because of the fact that obviously some of these things are unforeseen. It's not as if Rishi Sunak has got to surveil everyone around it to make sure they're not up to no good. But it's incredible how what was supposed to be a kind of safe pair of hands campaign has been so dogged by gaffes and scandals. And it's, in a way, it's a footnote to the bigger stories that we're talking about today in terms of just how bad the picture is for them. But how anything like this was allowed to keep happening is pretty incredible, really.
Well, the trouble is, with anything like this, if any of it is true, it's just people doing it off their own bat, isn't it? Just thinking, I can make myself a few £100 here. So, I mean, how can you possibly stop it?
I suppose that is the case. But I think the problem is when you have a build-up of these cases in the news, in the minds of voters, it will just add to that kind of general kind of stench of corruption or that kind of light sense. And that's the problem with these stories. Even if it's outside of your control, it does.
Which, indeed, it would be with a police protection officer. I mean, that's really nothing to do with any party, is it, really?
But it just keeps... I think it adds to the general kind of air of screw-up amongst the Tory party in this election. It reminds people that he called this election in such a hasty fashion in the first place. So even though, as you say, it's not something that Rishi Sunak could have any control over, it's more bad news in some sort of sense, I suppose, for him.
OK, yeah. We shall see you a little bit later on. I mean, it's so much there's just so much there, and it's very hard to see it as anything other than a disaster for the Tories. And so, although we didn't talk about reform a huge amount in that, it's fascinating for them that depending on which poll you look at, they could be getting 5 seats, they could be getting 7 seats, they could be getting no seats. How do you possibly tell? Well, you can't at this stage.